Arthur is a 94-year-old veteran battling Alzheimer's disease. His memories sometimes fade away and sometimes come back to life. The special bond he forms with young volunteer Sora reveals his unforgettable life story. One day, they embark on an unexpected journey to find his lost wife, Eleanor. On Veterans Day, forgotten memories come back to life, and a true awakening takes place. And finally, the story of an eternal love is completed in peace.
Hello, my dear friends. I am with you in this video with a new story.
The nursing home was quiet, a hushed stillness that settled heavy as a shroud. Arthur sat by the window, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the room. He stared out at the manicured lawn, a sea of green that offered little comfort. His gaze drifted, unfocused, lost somewhere beyond the neatly trimmed hedges. He was a ship adrift, unmoored from the present, his mind a turbulent ocean of fragmented memories. "Eleanor?" His voice was a raspy whisper, barely audible above the gentle hum of the air conditioning. He reached out a trembling hand, as if expecting someone to take it. "Where are you, love?" A nurse bustled in, her smile practiced and bright. "Arthur, dear, are you all right? Eleanor isn't here right now. She's—" The nurse hesitated, searching for the right words, a familiar struggle. "She's resting." Arthur frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Resting? But the dance. We can't be late for the dance." His eyes darted around the room, a flicker of panic in their depths. "Have you seen my uniform? Eleanor likes me in my uniform." The nurse sighed inwardly. This was a daily occurrence, a heartbreaking ritual. "Let's get you settled, Arthur. I'll bring you some juice and crackers." She adjusted his blanket, tucking it around his frail frame. "Eleanor will be back soon." He didn't seem to hear her, his gaze fixed on some distant point only he could see. "Eleanor," he murmured again, the name a fragile prayer on his lips. Sarah clutched her clipboard, trying to appear nonchalant as she followed Mrs. Davies, the head nurse, through the labyrinthine corridors of the nursing home. It was her first day as a volunteer, and the air hung heavy with the scent of disinfectant and unspoken anxieties. She had signed up hoping to make a difference, but the reality of the place, the sheer weight of its silence, was overwhelming. "And this is Arthur," Mrs. Davies said, pausing outside a room. "He's a World War II veteran, a lovely man, but his Alzheimer's is quite advanced." She offered Sarah a sympathetic smile. "He sometimes gets confused." Sarah peered into the room. An elderly man sat by the window, his face etched with a deep sadness. He looked lost, utterly alone. She felt a pang of empathy, a connection she couldn't quite explain. As they entered the room, Arthur turned, his eyes widening slightly. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps just wishful thinking, danced across his face. "Eleanor," he said, his voice trembling. "Is that really you?" Sarah froze, unsure how to respond. Mrs. Davies stepped forward, placing a hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Arthur, this is Sarah. She's a new volunteer. She's here to keep you company." Arthur blinked, his gaze shifting from Sarah to Mrs. Davies, confusion clouding his features. The moment of clarity, if that's what it had been, vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He looked back at Sarah, his expression blank. "Volunteer," he mumbled. "What war is she volunteering for?" Mrs. Davies gave Sarah an apologetic look. "He gets things mixed up, dear. Just be patient with him." She turned back to Arthur. "Sarah is here to be your friend, Arthur. Isn't that nice?" Arthur didn't reply, his attention already drifting. He began to hum softly, a tune Sarah vaguely recognized. "That's Moonlight Serenade," Mrs. Davies whispered. It was his and Eleanor's song. Sarah's eyes were drawn to a small, faded photograph on Arthur's bedside table. It was a picture of a young woman in a WAC uniform, her smile bright and confident. Eleanor. Even in the black and white image, her strength and beauty shone through. Sarah felt a surge of curiosity, a desire to know more about this woman and the life she had shared with Arthur. "I should get going," Mrs. Davies said, glancing at her watch. "Sarah, why don't you stay and chat with Arthur for a bit? Let me know if you need anything." Sarah nodded, mustering a smile. "Of course." Mrs. Davies left the room, leaving Sarah alone with Arthur and his fading memories. The silence stretched between them, broken only by Arthur's humming. Sarah walked over to the bedside table, picking up the photograph. She studied Eleanor's face, trying to imagine her life during the war. "She was a strong woman," Arthur said suddenly, his voice surprisingly clear. Sarah looked up, startled. "Eleanor!" Arthur nodded, his eyes focused on the photograph. "Stronger than me, sometimes. She kept us going when things got tough." He paused, his brow furrowing. "The dance. We met at a dance." A wave of music washed over him, pulling him back in time. The dance hall was alive with energy. Laughter and chatter mixed with the sounds of the Glenn Miller Orchestra, their music filling the air with a bittersweet joy. Young men in uniform, their faces full of hope and a touch of apprehension, twirled young women in their arms, their dresses swirling like colorful petals. Arthur, a fresh-faced private, stood awkwardly by the wall, nursing a lukewarm beer. He felt out of place, surrounded by so much confidence and exuberance. He longed to be on the dance floor, but he couldn't muster the courage to ask anyone to dance. Then he saw her. Eleanor. She stood across the room, her WAC uniform impeccably pressed, her dark hair swept up in a sophisticated style. Her eyes sparkled with intelligence and a quiet strength that drew him in. She was talking to a group of other women, her laughter ringing out above the music. He couldn't take his eyes off her. Taking a deep breath, he straightened his uniform and walked towards her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Excuse me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor turned, her eyes meeting his. A smile touched her lips. "Yes." Would you care to dance?" he stammered, feeling his cheeks flush. Eleanor hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'd love to." He led her onto the dance floor, his hand trembling slightly as he placed it on her waist. As the music swelled, they began to move together, their bodies swaying in perfect rhythm. He forgot his awkwardness, his fear. He forgot the war, the uncertainty of the future. In that moment, there was only Eleanor, her hand in his, her eyes locked on his. "You're a good dancer, Arthur," she said, her voice soft. "Thank you," he replied, feeling a surge of confidence. "You too, Eleanor." They danced for hours, lost in each other's company. They talked about their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. He learned that she was a radio operator, stationed at a nearby base. She was intelligent, witty, and fiercely independent. He was completely smitten. As the night drew to a close, he walked her back to her barracks. The air was cool and crisp, filled with the scent of pine. "I had a wonderful time, Arthur," Eleanor said, her eyes sparkling in the moonlight. "Me too," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want the night to end," she smiled. "It doesn't have to." He leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, tentative kiss that sent shivers down his spine. It was a kiss that promised a lifetime of love, a kiss that sealed their fate. The music faded. The dance hall dissolved. Arthur was back in the nursing home, the sterile silence pressing in on him. He blinked, his eyes unfocused. "The dance," he mumbled, his voice slurred. "We danced all night." Sarah watched him, her heart aching. The flashback had been so vivid, so real. It was as if she had been transported back in time, witnessing their love story unfold before her eyes. "It sounds like it was a wonderful night, Arthur," she said gently. He looked at her, his eyes filled with confusion. "Who are you?" he asked. "Are you here to take me to Eleanor?" Sarah knelt beside him, taking his hand in hers. His skin was thin and papery, his grip weak. "I'm Sarah," she said softly. "I'm here to be your friend." He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a glimmer of recognition flickered in his eyes. "Sarah," he repeated, his voice barely audible. "You remind me of her, you know. Eleanor." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I'll visit you again tomorrow, Arthur," she promised. "We can talk more about Eleanor." A faint smile touched his lips. "Eleanor," he murmured, his eyes closing. "My Eleanor." Sarah stood up, her heart filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. She looked down at Arthur, his frail body resting peacefully in the chair. She knew that his memories were fading, that his mind was slowly slipping away. But she also knew that his love for Eleanor remained, a bright flame burning in the darkness. And she was determined to keep that flame alive, to preserve his story for as long as she could. Sarah spent the evening after her first encounter with Arthur researching. She started with a general search: World War II veterans, Alzheimer's support, quickly spiraling into a deeper dive. She learned about the unique challenges faced by veterans struggling with memory loss, the way wartime trauma could manifest decades later, twisting and tangling with the progression of the disease. She discovered support groups, online forums, where families shared stories and strategies, a wealth of information painting a picture of a world she hadn't known existed. Then, she focused on Arthur himself. The nursing home's website offered a brief biography. Arthur Penhaligon, a decorated veteran of the Second World War, served with distinction in the European theater. A few details followed: his rank, the campaigns he'd participated in, the medals he'd received. There was no mention of Eleanor. Intrigued, Sarah dug deeper, venturing into online military archives and historical societies. It took hours of cross-referencing names and dates, but finally, she found her. Eleanor Reese Penhaligon, listed as a Women's Army Corps WAC radio operator. The records indicated she served in France during the latter years of the war, a detail that resonated with Arthur's fragmented ramblings about a mission. Sarah learned that the WAC was instrumental in providing crucial support during the war effort. Women like Eleanor handled communications, drove vehicles, and performed countless other essential tasks, freeing up men for combat. Eleanor's service record was commendatory, noting her exceptional skills and dedication. A small note indicated she received a commendation for her role in intercepting enemy communications that led to the disruption of a planned offensive. The more Sarah learned, the more she admired Eleanor. She imagined her, young and resolute, working tirelessly in a war-torn country, her thoughts constantly on Arthur's safety while contributing to the Allied victory. The next day, Sarah arrived at the nursing home, armed with a small CD player and a CD she'd painstakingly created. It contained a single track, Moonlight Serenade. She found Arthur in the same armchair as before, gazing blankly out the window. "Hello, Arthur," she said softly, approaching him. He turned, his eyes unfocused. "Eleanor?" he mumbled, a flicker of hope in his voice. Sarah's heart clenched. "No, Arthur, it's Sarah. I'm the volunteer from yesterday. Remember?" He studied her face, confusion clouding his features. "Sarah, yes. You remind me of her. I brought something for you," Sarah said, placing the CD player on the small table beside him. "I thought you might like to hear some music." She pressed play. The familiar strains of Moonlight Serenade filled the room. Arthur's eyes widened, a spark of recognition igniting within them. He closed his eyes, a faint smile gracing his lips. The music seemed to transport him. His breathing deepened and his expression softened. Sarah watched him, captivated, as the past seemed to wash over him in waves. The starlight was impossibly bright that night, painting the English countryside in shades of silver and black. Arthur held Eleanor's hand tightly as they walked along the lane, the air filled with the scent of honeysuckle and the distant rumble of bombers heading towards the continent. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Eleanor said, gazing up at the sky. "Not as beautiful as you," Arthur replied, his voice thick with emotion. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "Eleanor," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll come back from France. But I do know that I love you more than anything in this world." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. He flipped it open, revealing a simple gold band. Eleanor gasped, her eyes filling with tears. "Will you marry me, Eleanor? Will you be my wife?" Eleanor didn't hesitate. "Yes, Arthur, yes, 1,000 times, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. They stood there for a long moment, locked in an embrace, the weight of the war momentarily forgotten. He whispered the vows he had created in his mind, over and over. Enduring love, cherishing each other forever, commitment until the end of their days. The music faded, bringing Arthur back to the present. He opened his eyes, his brow furrowed. He looked around the room, disoriented. "Eleanor?" he asked, his voice laced with urgency. "Where's Eleanor?" "I need to protect her." Sarah knelt beside him, taking his hand. "What is it, Arthur? What do you need to protect her from?" He squeezed her hand tightly, his eyes filled with fear. "The mission. I have to warn her. They're going to attack. She's in danger," Sarah gently probed. "What mission, Arthur? Tell me about it." He struggled to focus, his thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. France, the radio. She was sending messages, important messages. But they knew. The Germans knew. He trailed off, his breathing becoming shallow. Sarah could see the panic rising in his eyes. "It's okay, Arthur," she said soothingly. "You're safe now. Eleanor is safe too." He shook his head vehemently. "No! I have to find her! I have to warn her!" As Arthur shifted in his seat, Sarah noticed something peeking out from under the cushion. She reached for it and pulled out an old, worn-out map. It was creased and faded, its edges frayed. The map was of France, marked with military symbols and handwritten annotations. It looked like something straight out of a history book. "What's this, Arthur?" Sarah asked, gently unfolding the map. He stared at it, his eyes widening. "The map, the mission. I have to get to her before it's too late. Sarah realized that this map, this mission, was deeply ingrained in Arthur's mind. It was a tangible representation of his wartime experiences, a symbol of his enduring love and his desperate need to protect Eleanor. That evening, back in her own apartment, Sarah carefully spread the map out on her table. She studied the markings, trying to decipher their meaning. She cross-referenced the locations with historical records, piecing together a picture of the area where Eleanor had served. She realized that Arthur's mission wasn't just a figment of his imagination. It was rooted in reality, in the events of the Second World War, and somehow she felt compelled to help him fulfill it, not by physically retracing his steps, but by documenting his stories, by preserving his memories, by ensuring that Eleanor's sacrifices and their love were never forgotten. Sarah decided to purchase a digital voice recorder and a small notebook. Her plan was to visit Arthur regularly, to listen to his stories, to ask questions, and to meticulously record everything he said. She would become his scribe, his biographer, his keeper of memories. She hoped that, by giving Arthur a voice, she could somehow ease his pain, bring him peace, and help him complete his mission. Whatever that may be, Sarah settled into a routine. Each afternoon, after her university classes, she would visit Arthur. The sterile quiet of the nursing home was a stark contrast to the vibrant world she was discovering through Arthur's memories. She brought her digital recorder, a small, unobtrusive device that she hoped wouldn't intimidate him. Initially, Arthur was wary, his gaze darting between the recorder and Sarah's face with suspicion. But Sarah, with her gentle voice and patient demeanor, soon put him at ease. "Arthur," she'd begin, always addressing him formally, "can you tell me about the war? What it was like?" Sometimes he would stare blankly, his eyes lost in the fog of Alzheimer's. Other times a spark would ignite, and the stories would tumble out, fragmented yet vivid, like shards of colored glass. He recounted details of his wartime experiences, acts of bravery he downplayed with a shrug, the camaraderie he shared with his fellow soldiers, and the ever-present, gnawing fear for Eleanor's safety. He spoke of muddy trenches, the deafening roar of artillery, and the letters he wrote to Eleanor, pouring his heart onto paper, hoping they would reach her across the miles. "We were just boys, Sarah," he'd say, his voice cracking with emotion. "Boys playing a man's game, a terrible game." Then, the memories of Eleanor would surface. He'd describe her letters, filled with unwavering support and quiet strength. He remembered the scent of her perfume lingering on the paper, a tangible reminder of the woman he was fighting to protect. A new flashback began to form, triggered by Sarah's gentle prompting. It was Eleanor working as a radio operator, her fingers flying across the keys of a complex machine. The room hummed with the energy of intercepted messages and urgent commands. "Eleanor was brilliant, you know," Arthur said, his eyes shining with pride. "She worked with the Women's Army Corps. Top secret stuff. Code breaking, intercepting enemy communications. She saved countless lives." In the flashback, Eleanor sat hunched over her equipment, her brow furrowed in concentration. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she deciphered a coded message. The news was grim. A planned attack on a nearby Allied base. Fear clenched at her heart. Arthur was stationed near that base. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the din of the communications room. The image of his smiling face flashed before her eyes. She had to warn him. Back in the present, Arthur's hand trembled as he reached out to Sarah. "She was so brave," he murmured, "always thinking of others, even when she was scared." Sarah carefully steered the conversation back to the present, offering Arthur a glass of water and a comforting smile. She knew she was treading carefully on fragile ground. The past was a powerful force, capable of both healing and hurting. The next day, Sarah brought a collection of old photographs and historical information about the Women's Army Corps. She spread them out on the table in front of Arthur, hoping to stimulate his memory further. There were pictures of women working in factories, driving trucks, and operating complex machinery, all vital roles in the war effort. She pointed to a photograph of a group of WAC radio operators. "Arthur, do you see Eleanor in any of these women? Do you remember what she did specifically?" Arthur peered at the photograph, his brow furrowed in concentration. He pointed to a young woman with dark hair, pulled back in a tight bun, her eyes focused intently on her work. "That could be her," he said, his voice hesitant. "She was always so focused, so determined." Sarah gently guided him, focusing on Eleanor's role during the war, linking it to his recurring mission. She showed him maps of France, highlighting the areas where Eleanor had been stationed. "Arthur, you mentioned a mission to protect Eleanor. Can you tell me more about that?" The question seemed to unlock something within him. His eyes widened and his breathing quickened. He began to speak in a rush, the words tumbling out in a torrent of fragmented memories. "The message? I had to get the message to her. The attack. Coming soon." Another flashback erupted, more vivid and intense than the others. Arthur was a young soldier again, his face grimy with dirt and sweat. He was running through a war-torn landscape, dodging explosions and gunfire. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and burning metal. He recalled the mission, delivering a coded message to Eleanor, warning her of an impending German attack. It was crucial information that could save countless lives, including hers. He described a fierce battle, the deafening roar of artillery, and the desperate scramble to reach Eleanor before it was too late. He remembered the fear, the adrenaline, and the unwavering determination to protect the woman he loved. He saw the faces of his comrades, some falling beside him, others urging him onward. He felt the weight of his rifle in his hands, the burning in his lungs, and the relentless pounding of his heart. He finally reached Eleanor's unit, breathless and exhausted. He delivered the message, his voice hoarse with urgency. Eleanor received the message, her expression grave. She immediately began to implement the necessary precautions, coordinating the defense of the base. The attack came swiftly and violently, but thanks to Eleanor's quick thinking and Arthur's timely warning, the Allied forces were prepared. They repelled the enemy, minimizing casualties and preventing a major strategic loss. The flashback ended abruptly, leaving Arthur gasping for breath. He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. "I got the message to her," he said, his voice trembling. "I saved her." But then a shadow crossed his face. "But what if it wasn't enough? What if she's still in danger?" Sarah reached out and took his hand, her touch gentle and reassuring. "Arthur, Eleanor is safe. The war is over. You did everything you could to protect her." But Arthur remained unconvinced. The mission, in his mind, was incomplete. He still felt the need to protect Eleanor, even after all these years. "I have to find her," he insisted, his eyes pleading. I have to make sure she's okay. Sarah knew she couldn't reason with him. She couldn't erase the years of memory loss and the deep-seated anxieties that plagued his mind. But she could offer him something else: understanding, compassion, and a willingness to play along. "Arthur," she said softly, "I understand, and I promise you, I will help you fulfill your mission. We will find Eleanor together, through your stories." Arthur looked at her, his eyes searching her face. For a moment, he seemed to see Eleanor standing before him, young and vibrant, her eyes filled with love and hope. He squeezed Sarah's hand, a faint smile gracing his lips. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for helping me." Sarah knew she couldn't truly find Eleanor, but she could help Arthur find peace by giving him a voice, by listening to his stories, and by preserving the memory of the woman he loved. That night, Sarah sat at her computer, typing furiously. She compiled the notes from her conversations with Arthur, piecing together the fragmented memories and weaving them into a coherent narrative. She researched the battles he had described, verifying the historical details and adding context to his personal experiences. She decided to start posting summaries of Arthur's story online on a veterans' history forum. She hoped that someone with more specialized knowledge of World War II history might offer new insights or be able to fill in the gaps in Arthur's memory. She wrote of Eleanor's service and the vital role that women played during the war, often overlooked in history books. As she typed, she felt a growing sense of responsibility. She was not just documenting a story, she was preserving a legacy. The legacy of Arthur and Eleanor's love, their sacrifice, and their enduring commitment to each other. And she knew, with a certainty that warmed her heart, that their story deserved to be told. She ended that night's post with a question. "Does anyone know of a Women's Army Corps radio operator named Eleanor, serving in France during 1944? She closed her laptop, feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced before. She was no longer just a volunteer. She was a guardian of memories, a keeper of stories, and a champion of enduring love. The nursing home buzzed with an unusual energy. Today was Veterans Day, and a small ceremony was planned in the main hall. Arthur sat quietly in his wheelchair, his gaze distant, seemingly oblivious to the activity around him. Sarah sat beside him, offering a gentle smile. She had dressed him in his best clothes, a crisp shirt and neatly pressed trousers. Pinned to his chest were his war medals, gleaming softly under the fluorescent lights. He looked every inch the war hero, even if the hero himself seemed lost in the fog of his mind. Sarah squeezed his hand gently. "Are you ready, Arthur?" she asked softly. He blinked, his eyes focusing on her with a flicker of recognition. "Eleanor?" he murmured, his voice raspy. Sarah's heart ached. "No, Arthur, it's Sarah. I'm here with you." He looked confused, his brow furrowing. "Eleanor should be here. She promised." His voice trailed off, lost in the labyrinth of his memories. The main hall was decorated with American flags and patriotic banners. Residents, some in wheelchairs, others with walkers, were gathering, their faces etched with a mixture of anticipation and weariness. A small stage had been set up, with a podium and a microphone. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and disinfectant, a stark contrast to the grandeur of the occasion. The ceremony began with a short speech by the nursing home director, Mrs. Davison, a kind but somewhat impersonal woman. She spoke of the sacrifices made by veterans, the importance of remembering their service, and the debt of gratitude owed to them. Her words felt hollow somehow, failing to capture the true weight of the veteran's experiences. Arthur remained withdrawn, his eyes fixed on the floor. Sarah watched him with concern, wondering if the noise and commotion were overwhelming him. She knew that Veterans Day could be a mixed blessing for veterans like Arthur, a reminder of both their proudest moments and their deepest losses. Then, a familiar melody filled the room. The opening notes of Moonlight Serenade drifted through the air, played by a local musician hired for the event. Sarah felt Arthur stiffen beside her. His head lifted, his eyes widening with a sudden, startling clarity. The music seemed to cut through the fog of his Alzheimer's, reaching a part of him that had been dormant for so long. He straightened in his wheelchair, his posture momentarily regaining its former strength. The years seemed to melt away from his face, replaced by a youthful alertness. He closed his eyes, and Sarah could see the memories flooding back, vivid and real. Flashback. Arthur and Eleanor are dancing at a USO club, bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the windows. The music swells around them, carrying them away on a tide of romance. Eleanor's laughter rings out, light and carefree. Arthur holds her close, his heart overflowing with love. He whispers in her ear, "This is our song, Ellie. Always and forever." Eleanor smiles, her eyes sparkling with happiness. "Always and forever, Arthur," she replies, her voice filled with tenderness. The music ended, but Arthur remained transfixed, lost in the memory. Mrs. Davison, noticing Arthur's sudden alertness, approached him with a smile. "Arthur," she said, her voice gentle, "we would be honored if you would say a few words. You are one of our heroes, and we would love to hear your story." Arthur looked at her, his eyes clear and focused. For the first time in weeks, he seemed fully present, the Alzheimer's momentarily at bay. He nodded slowly, and Sarah helped him to his feet. He walked to the podium, his steps surprisingly steady, his back straight. He gripped the microphone, his hand trembling slightly. He looked out at the small crowd, his gaze sweeping across the faces of his fellow veterans, their families, and the nursing home staff. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "I don't remember a lot these days," he said, his voice strong and resonant. "But I remember Eleanor. I remember her smile, her laugh, the way she used to hum when she was working. She was the bravest person I ever knew." He paused, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We were young, full of dreams, when the war came. I went off to fight, and she joined the Women's Army Corps. We were both scared, but we knew we had to do our part." He spoke of the sacrifices Eleanor made, the long hours she worked, the constant worry she endured. He recounted her unwavering support, her belief in him, and the strength she gave him to keep fighting. "She wasn't on the front lines, but she was a soldier just the same," he said, his voice filled with pride. "She saved lives, she helped win the war, and she did it all with a smile on her face." He spoke of the enduring power of love, the importance of commitment, and the need to remember those who served. He didn't dwell on the horrors of war, but instead focused on the human spirit, the resilience, and the capacity for love that even the darkest times could not extinguish. "Love is the most powerful weapon of all," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "It can conquer fear, overcome adversity, and endure even after we're gone." He looked at Sarah, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Eleanor is gone now," he said softly, "but her love lives on, in my heart, in my memories, and in the stories we share. He took a final breath, his gaze sweeping across the room one last time. "Remember them," he said simply. "Remember their sacrifices, their courage, and their love, and never forget what they fought for." He stepped away from the podium, his task complete. Sarah rushed to his side, her eyes filled with tears. She helped him back to his wheelchair, and he sank into it, his body suddenly weary. The room erupted in applause, a heartfelt tribute to Arthur and to all the veterans who had served their country. Sarah looked at Arthur, his face serene, his eyes closed. He seemed at peace, his mind finally quiet. A few weeks later, Arthur passed away peacefully in his sleep. Sarah was heartbroken, but she knew that his story would live on. She meticulously compiled all the recordings, photographs, and documents she had collected, creating a detailed account of Arthur's life and his enduring love for Eleanor. She posted the entirety of her documentation on a veteran's website, ensuring that their story would be shared with the world. She received countless messages from people who had been touched by Arthur's words, inspired by his love, and grateful for his service. Sarah returned to the nursing home one last time to say her final goodbye. She stood by Arthur's empty bed, a photograph of Eleanor by his bedside, alongside his medals. She whispered a silent prayer, thanking him for sharing his story with her, for teaching her about love, loss, and the importance of remembering. She knew that Arthur's memory would live on, not just in the stories she had preserved, but in the hearts of all those who had been touched by his life. And she knew that Eleanor, wherever she was, would be proud of the man she had loved, the hero she had supported, and the legacy they had left behind. Sarah touched the photograph one last time, and then with a final look, she turned and walked away, carrying with her the enduring power of their love story.
Our story is over, and I hope you liked it. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. You can write your requests in the comments.